this one.
Perfect, thank you. So, welcome again to our exciting GeoField convening. Welcome also to all the folks who are joining online. Very excited to have such a great group of people in one place, both in person and virtually. I just want to remind everybody that your presence at this convening grants permission to AidData, Dev Global, Mercy Corps, and the partners to photograph, video record your image and or voice. We're going to release, publish, broadcast this material, not for commercial purposes, but to be able to share the knowledge that we're generating here today. This first session, I'm going to turn the floor over to David Laborde in just a moment to give you the perspective of the FAO in kind of creating a lot of the work related to this, and then I'll also try to give you some of the origin story for our GeoField initiative, some of the motivation for it, and some of the things we're hoping to do, and to be able to also get some feedback and ideas from you as to ways that we can continue to improve it. So, David, do you want to give some opening remarks?
Yes, thanks, Ariel. So thanks, everyone, for being here. It's great to see people from all around the world gathering again in Rome, especially for such an important event and topic. So I am formally welcoming you at FAO headquarters. It's great to see this GeoField community coming together. I'm David Laborde. I am the director of the Agrifood Economics Division, with the acronym is ESA. So just be careful when you will hear ESA or ESA during the coming days. Most of the time it will not be about us, but about the European Space Agency. But still, I mean, we share some common goals and value. I'm also here to give you the warmest regards and welcoming words from our Chief Economist, Maximo Torero, that unfortunately for us is traveling to the Americas currently. He cannot be there, and due to the time difference cannot be connected to welcome you. Even if we have asked him, he would have done it for us. So for FAO, as I will discuss during my welcoming remark, that as you see will last for 75 minutes in the program, but hopefully Ariel will take more time than me. This topic is pretty important for FAO and fits in the overall strategy that I will refer to. I also want to thank my colleague Anna Paola that has helped getting this alive here and coordinating that. So our collaboration in this context with AidData started in 2021, linked to the support of the N-in-N initiative, and that you had a training and a presentation yesterday for the people lucky enough to have attended it. And in this context, there is a full capacity development program and partners on geospatial impact evaluation. At a more personal level, the first time I was introduced to AidData was through one of our partners and donor, the Gates Foundation, more than 10 years ago. Then they were showing me some of the great work that AidData was doing, and like in many cases in my business, people say, can you do something with this data? Because I think it's key, and at FAO, in particular in my division, we are doing analysis, but we cannot do analysis with good data, with updated data, and today with spatial data. Now, I will not talk about my personal story longer, even if I will come back to it, but more recently, under the GeoField initiative, we have collaborated to enhance our method and tools applied to geospatial impact evaluation. Because I think that, when you have data, the question is what you want to do. And impact evaluation is really a field where, first, in the last 20 years, a lot of progresses have been made. But the demand is high. Sometimes we can think it's actually not high enough because there are too many projects or decisions that may not be properly evaluated. And we have to change this through innovation, through new approaches, through cost reduction in what we do. And this question of geodata and Earth observation can contribute to that. But also nowadays we have to deal with new challenges, in particular in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation, where this question of geography and spatially explicit data will be more important. Now, there is no one organization or one team or one researcher that can cover all the topics we have to do. We need complementarity, both in terms of location, method, and disciplines. And I think that one of the great value of this GeoField community and initiative is to bring together at a global scale, both global organization, regional organization, in some case country-level partners. Some are doing very academic work, some are very applied, some are economists, some are data specialists, some are experts in Earth observation. You can have a background in computation, a background in analysis, or even in policy design or project implementation. And in order to make sure we deliver something relevant, we need to combine all of this. Now, what the GeoField tried to achieve is, as I've said, highly aligned with FAO strategy, both in terms of content and vision. As you know, for the last years, I'm not going to give a starting date on that, but FAO had a strong digital revolution, evidence-based approach, data-driven vision. And in the context, once again, of climate change, this is even more urgent than ever. Now, we need to innovate, we need to do research, we need to do high-quality things, but at the end, the question is why we are doing that. And we have, of course, the Agenda 2030, we have the SDG, we want to end hunger, we want to end malnutrition, we want to end poverty in a sustainable way. Now, I don't want to make comparison that can be a bit excessive, but I really think that this is something you have to think about like in a conflict, in a war. We are at war with hunger. And the main comparison I make is today is if you want to win a war, you need eyes in the sky, but you need also boots on the ground. And I think that's something that today and tomorrow and in the months to come, people will continue to build and develop, is how you combine things. It's not Earth observation is going to replace survey in the field. But you cannot win this war just with one tool, or actually the cost is going to be crazy. It's a complementarity. It's a strategic vision that will allow to deliver at scale and in a cost-efficient way. I think we should never forget about this, at least as an economist, I never forget about it. There are costs, there are benefits, and we want an optimal decision. We want an optimal mix. So, this question of synergies across method and disciplines are going to be, as I've said, and I hope, part a lot of this discussion. In addition to satellite, in the last few years, what really have changed is how machine learning, artificial intelligence have become a more bread and butter in a lot of the field we use. In some cases, it's just doing faster what we were able to use or in more systematic way. In some cases, it's actually a real revolution. There is things we were not even dreaming to do, and now, if we understand them, we can do it. So, how now you combine all of this to deliver on not only making nice map, building nice data, but actually delivering on this impact evaluation issue? We'll have a lot of challenges that you will discuss. Now, FAO is highly committed to deliver on this, both as being a facilitator, like today, by welcoming people from all over the place. Also, FAO is not a monopoly. We are not going to do everything on our own. I would like to, more people doing more things, but actually it will not even be optimal. But we have a strong impact evaluation task force that think about how FAO is thinking and doing impact evaluation internally, because actually FAO is not just a knowledge-generating entity. There is a lot of projects that FAO is implemented on the ground, and we want to improve FAO project. We want to improve when we work with countries, with partners, but also in some cases, other partners are coming to us to do impact evaluation. So really, when you will discuss with our FAO colleagues, you will see this diversity. Something is just, we want to be better at what we do, and also we want to generate positive externality and help others to be better at what they do, once again, to deliver for our key stakeholders. In order to deliver on this mission, we have also the Independent Office of Evaluation that is both growing and scaling up actually its investment in this new technology and how we think about geospatial impact evaluation. Because maybe I'm going to say something that is very simple. I said before that, climate change, spatial dimension matters. But in agriculture and in rural development, space matters even more. The level of heterogeneity we see across space is so huge that we cannot simplify that, okay? And that's something we have to keep in mind. So, based on our internal mandate and our FAO strategy, we want to make sure that we are also learning from you, that we are aware of the different current challenges. So we are both contributing and learning, and we are catalytic to improvement and change. Now, FAO itself, for a long time, has looked about what we can do with Earth observation in terms of tracking various crises, pests, building land cover data, monitoring deforestation, thinking about rural development in infrastructure. We are not only collecting information in Rome, but we are building capacities in countries. I think that's very important. FAO mission is, first of all, with its members, and therefore, the goal is, once again, not to have a monopoly or to be a critical mass of knowledge. We want to build capacity in countries to help, and that's what we do in many countries today. We have more than 70 on-the-ground initiatives, for example, how countries can build this knowledge hub and method using Earth observation and satellite data to get better food and agriculture-related statistics, and also updated more frequently. I think that's going to be also an important question is, policymaker nowadays doesn't want to have a description of the world that is 3 or 4 years old, or wait 10 years to know if the decision they have taken is good or bad. So how we can reduce the amount of time we need to generate data, and from this data generate evidence for informed decision making is particularly important. And that's where the complementarity with artificial intelligence is so strong. Because in the past we have a lot of data, with a lot of man-made treatment, it will take months, years. With good programming skills, good AI, you can do now in a few days what will have taken months to do. I've said I will not bother you with my personal history, but actually the first job I did for the UN more than 20 years ago was people have a very large data set, and they were saying, okay, normally we need 3 P2 to do this job. With my programming skill, I take 2 weeks. So you can think about who we're getting from the productivity gain on that, but at the end, it's the consumer, the policymakers. We can process large data set in a small amount of time to deliver better facts, better evidence to people. I will also add that, so developing this algorithm, developing these IT capabilities, now also thinking about how we can use the cloud is important. I will just make one minor remark. Everyone in the world doesn't have the same access to this cloud, okay? So now it's already much better to send a request to the cloud than have to download terabytes of data when you have bad internet access. But I also think that, it's not because we can do things in Rome or we can do things in Stanford that we should expect every country, everyone to be able to do the same. So we need to think about also scaling down sometimes what we want to do to make sure it can be implemented, and implemented by a large number, not just a minority. On artificial intelligence and machine learning in particular, also FAO has innovative in terms of institutional design. We have a data lab that is doing a lot of great things. As I've said yesterday, you have also seen how we are bringing together data in the end-to-end geospatial platform, where you will see actually a wide range of data on climate, on socioeconomic elements coming from traditional survey. You will see Earth observation data on a number of topics. You will see even maritime transportation data coming from different sources. Data actually link also to the new universe we are in, because all these ships have transponder. You can monitor them in real time. both with station on the ground and satellite. And so this is really this combination of pictures that give you an idea of, okay, what is the weather shock? How logistics is reacting? Which country can actually benefit from being more integrated or not? That by changing this global or regional environment can actually have an impact on your project. I mean, sometimes, you know, when you want to know if a project was good or not, but you need to have sometimes a broader picture to understand what may have impacted that. So now, how we are going to reflect on this conveying and what will make it a success or not. It's good that we talk about impact evaluation. Me, the first thing I will think about is, was this conveying a good thing or not? Did it deliver an impact? When Ana Paola will come in potentially 1 year and say, do we do it again? I'm not going to say yes. I'll say, if we have created value and deliver services. So we need really to be results focused. So of course, for me, I will have my own assessment criteria. That will be, you know, when I meet people in 6 months from now, we will say, oh, you know, we have discussed this at the event in Rome. Because unfortunately, I mean, we are doing a lot of events, to be honest. And especially since the end of COVID, everyone said, okay, we have money to spend, we need to see people, let's meet every day, every week somewhere. People invite me. I say, okay, are we doing not too much? You know, so we have a climate crisis, so let's think about how we travel. But I really think, you know, that bringing people in one place is great. What they will create from this event is more important. So people have to remember, either in real event, on social media, but at the end also is how many papers, how many joint projects will be generated from this convening. And that's something I would like to see in 6 months to know, is an Apollo saying, you know, look, these 2 people have met there, potentially they get married, but I'm not interested in that. They make not a baby, but a paper, you know, or they have contributed on this project. Or because we have discussed this, the new project that was designed has already actually embedded some Earth observation vision from the beginning and not at the end. So you are going to discuss methodology, you are going to discuss how this new technology can be adapted to your question, who can access it. I think that some IP right issue may be discussed, you know. Everything is not public good yet. And sometimes human capital is still going to be a limitation, but obviously with such events we can reduce that. I also hope that you are going to have some tough discussion, you know, because it's important to be transparent, to know what people are doing, to not oversell, to build trust, okay? The more complex things we are doing, the more trust is important, okay? We are not going to replicate everyone's paper every day based on the amount of paper we are creating. So it's important to have standards, it's important that sometimes people are doing it, but it's very important to be transparent and to know that when you see some new results, you don't say, okay, I don't really trust this guy. He's having a bright idea every couple of weeks, but when we start to look at details, things are not there. So just to make sure that transparency, rigor is important. And at the end, as I've said, we are fighting hunger, we are fighting poverty. We also want to make sure that we deliver on inclusiveness. So you know how we deal with specificity that may not be so easy to observe from a satellite, so social realities, gender inequalities, how indigenous communities are treated. That's going to be important. Now, just to conclude, as I've said, you are going to have very intense discussion. The program is very rich. I will not attend all sessions, let's be clear and honest. But I will listen to different debrief I will have with my team, and I will keep an eye, not from a satellite, but at least with the internet, on who is saying what on this event and who will do great things from this event. So thanks a lot, and let's build together a more resilient agri-food system, even if at the end, most of the job will be done by farmers and by people on the ground, but we can contribute to this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. That was really helpful and a good chance again to say thank you to the FAO for hosting us in this beautiful venue and a great spot for us to gather from all over the world. And also thanks for challenging us. Very much our goal here to find new ways to collaborate across space, across disciplines, and across organizational and individual boundaries that we normally face constraints. So we really appreciate both the physical and the kind of mental space that we have to do this collaboration. I'm just going to give you a little bit of kind of the background of what this is all about, and then also leave plenty of time for questions and feedback. David also very helpfully teed this up in terms of the climate crisis that we face. Right? A lot of our efforts to collaborate across these disciplinary and, again, organizational and spatial boundaries and barriers really are driven by the need for real climate action now. And if we're honest, again, about the hard work that farmers and herders and other folks around the world are doing, right, to try to draw sustenance and nutrients out of the earth and sunshine and water, right, to be able to understand and learn much more quickly how they respond to the changing climate that we all are facing, right? I mean, I don't think it's lost on anyone that the past 3 months were the hottest recorded in human history. And so the need for more learning about how the programs, interventions, and efforts to support those farmers to farm and again, herd livestock in much more resilient ways, that need is imminent. It's been imminent for a long time now, but it is ever more now than it ever has been before. And so we need to learn faster, quite simply. And a core backbone of the way we learn about impact has been impact evaluation. And impact evaluation simply needs to happen faster, right? Many of us who do impact evaluations for a living are, continuing to take years to produce them. We don't have that luxury anymore, simply put. I wish we did, because that would be much easier, right, for us all, but we don't. So how do we overcome those limitations to learning? Well, we have to be a little bit honest, I think, about what some of the limitations are to impact evaluation kind of coverage and ability to generate that learning. Obviously, collecting data directly by interviewing people on the ground is costly and challenging. And here I mean costs that are both the actual costs of traveling, right, and employing people to ask questions and do the interviewing, but also, of course, the design costs to doing that, as well as the additional costs that doing it in fragile or conflict-affected areas entails, right? There's kind of a whole range of costs that go into actually obtaining a data point from a person who's being interviewed. And those costs are large, and they are a core constraint on our ability to learn, right, simply put. There's also the kind of hidden challenges, if you will, of impact evaluation, which is that we want real standards to be able to understand rigorously whether the actual effects we believe we're observing are causally attributed to the intervention or the program that is being carried out. And that rigor, that standards, has limitations on designs. And in many cases, we say no, we pass up opportunities to learn from programs because we can't retrofit, or maybe even in some cases can't design ex ante an impact evaluation in that setting. And so we're passing up on a lot of opportunities to learn, both opportunities to learn from programs that have already happened and interventions that have been carried out, and new stuff as well. And so that design limitation is also slowing down our ability to learn. And then, kind of circling back to the climate challenge, the kinds of things we can learn by interviewing people are important, but they don't capture all of the things happening in the environment around them. Often because those people themselves can't necessarily see them. In some cases, it's because those are literally beyond their sight. In some cases, because those changes are happening at a more aggregate or subtle way that no individual person might be able to see. Again, this idea that the last 3 months were among the hottest in recorded human history, no one individual could tell you that by their personal experience necessarily, right? That had to be aggregated across the observations of humans and in some cases historical artifacts as well, right? So that ability to draw insight about the environment around us, right, necessitates doing more than just surveying people. And obviously there's lots of ways we can collect that data on the environment on the ground as well, and that faces many of those earlier costs we talked about. So these challenges to impact evaluation and our ability to learn about how to make the agri-food systems much more resilient, these challenges are very, very much kind of front and center for us. So those are some of the challenges. In the meantime, while impact evaluation has been wrestling, and that world has been wrestling with these challenges, of course, there have been major advances already in the space of Earth observation and opportunities for learning. These are like a few very seminal moments, and I'm going to apologize in advance that many of you have published things that I don't have on this slide, okay? And these are like a few of my top hits, but everyone has their own mixtape that you can make of your own favorites. But thinking back, roughly 2 decades to the first real time series that we have of nighttime lights drawn by Chris Elvidge and others to put that time series together. Lots of issues with that time series, that with the advantage of 2 decades on of being able to poke holes in it, we can now think through. But this was one of the first, I would say, most reliable sources of disaggregated data on economic activity and electrification and other related activities, right, that we had, and disaggregated down to scales that we did not think were really possible at that time, right? This was, again, a time when we were still doing like cross-national regressions in the sense that like we have one observation for a country for a year. And the nighttime lights data gave us an observation at a kilometer, right, for every year at that point. And we thought that was revolutionary. So like a major taking off point. Skip over a bunch of, again, really important stuff that happens in this decade and move forward to circa 2012. And we have what I think about as one of the kind of very first important and well-cited instances where social scientists begin to realize that, oh my gosh, this data are available and can do impressive things. And Henderson, Sturgard, and Wild used this to basically look at economic growth across countries at a kind of much more systematic and panel kind of informed way. Right? And this is, again, kind of revolutionary in the sense that we're thinking about disaggregating the units into much more kind of finer scales. Moving beyond nighttime lights, we start to look at other biophysical aspects and think about how to use those for, again, important impact evaluation uses. So the global forest cover data that Matt Hansen and all published in 2013, one of the, I would say, like most heavily cited uses in this. So start to think about being able to look at forest cover at incredibly finer scales. These data go down to 30 meters. I don't necessarily advise that you use them at that 30-meter scale, but that, again, starting from a country roughly a decade before down to a kilometer, down to now these kind of 30-meter scales, in some cases available even more frequently than annual time series, we're starting to think about what we can do with this in panel formats. Circa 2016, really great research team at Stanford thinking about, okay, how do we start combining economic data on household assets and household consumption being drawn from surveys together with satellite data, not only nighttime lights data, but also multispectral imagery drawn from daytime satellite images, right? And to David's point, how do we use machine learning to actually try to draw those relationships in much more robust and systematic ways? And so develops a asset wealth and household consumption measure that's predicted from satellite imagery directly. And then the next year, a different version of that team puts out another exciting paper on smallholder yields, especially in key cereals. Again, combining data from household surveys and satellite imagery over those in daytime images. Again, a few top hits. Other things that didn't make it on the slide in 2015 and 16, both the European Space Agency and private companies like Planet launch a bunch of new satellite configurations that offer us really exciting, again, higher resolution, faster time frequencies, all of which inform everything that I didn't stick on the slide in the past 6 years. But this idea of the time frequency of the measurement, I think, is really important for us to be able to understand the applicability to impact evaluation. And again, to kind of go back to this idea of faster learning. So the Earth observation measures that we're talking about are like drawn from sources that give us much faster revisit rates or much faster frequencies. And why is that important, and how does that change impact evaluation? First of all, that availability on an ongoing basis gives us much more powerful ways to track the longer tail of impacts of investments that are already being made. Again, if we're trying to learn faster about what works, the most natural place to get that learning is from stuff we've already done, right, previously, investments that have already been made. And what we're trying to understand is how have those been sustained, not just during the projects when most of the impact evaluations were completed, but long after the initial investments were made. What is that sustainability path or the long tail of those impacts? Earth observation gives us a pretty cost-effective way to do that relative to the idea of, again, sending survey teams to go find those original plots, those original farmers 5, 10, 15 years after the interventions have been carried out. Right? So one important aspect. Secondly, that repeated observation, that much more complete time series, gives us the ability to recreate robust impact evaluation designs, even in places where we might not have designed them that way from the start. I'll give you an example in a few minutes, but the ability to do much more robust panel analysis, kind of fixed effects models or difference in difference models, but with observations that aren't just once or twice before the intervention's carried out, so you can say, okay, this kind of looks like the comparison group and the intervention group are roughly similar, but you know, the samples aren't that huge and we only get them one point in time. No, we have a full time series of these groups that we can do much more robust kind of comparison group design that way. And then, again, going back to the climate aspect, that repeated observation lets us see these folks and the communities both during good times and harder times. Again, thinking about the last 3 months being among the hottest in recorded human history, if we had surveyed people during this past summer, we might get very different results than if we had surveyed them earlier in the spring or in the winter, right? And that choice kind of forces our hand in many cases. This satellite-drawn data, right, doesn't basically relaxes that constraint, right? It doesn't make us choose in the same way. We get to observe both during harsher climate conditions and more lenient ones, and that lets us learn about resiliency. Again, to David's point about resiliency being a thing that we have to be able to observe much more directly and frequently, right? Those times observations are critical to that. So let me kind of walk you through an example just to highlight these points. This is from some recent work that our team at AidData has done in Mali, combining a bunch of satellite imagery together with some surveys and along with some partners at German DVAL. So this was a small-scale irrigation project funded by both the German government and a bunch of other international supporters. And small-scale irrigation here means pumps, largely diesel pumps, to draw water from the Niger River and its other tributaries onto nearby fields. So this isn't like big irrigation canals, right? This is small scale onto a few hectares, in some cases dozens of hectares of plots. I'll show you some imagery in just a minute, naturally. But one of the things that we could do is to say, okay, this investment took place over in some cases, well over a decade ago. What is that long tail of impacts look like? Again, can we go back and say, what does the past 10 or 15 years look like from these investments? So the kind of blue right-hand side of this graph shows you some of that, right? We can see treatment effects even 15 years out for some of these investments. And they're actually remarkably stable, right? The fact that things seem to improve pretty quickly after the irrigation sets in and then remain remarkably stable is a good news story, right? Especially because in many cases, these were irrigation pumps that were put in, farmers were provided a little bit of training, but beyond that, there wasn't necessarily a long-term strategy of remaining, in those communities and continuing to operate and maintain those pumps and provide other support for it. So that long tail is, again, super important. On the red left-hand side of that graph, you also can start to see some of what I was referring to as the causal design limits beginning to kind of be relaxed. So that is what we call the pre-trend coefficients. Those are really the comparisons between the communities that have received the irrigation and between communities that have yet to receive the irrigation and communities that will receive them but really haven't yet. And you can see that there's not much change before the irrigation sets in. This is kind of reassuring us that our comparison group design here is valid in the sense that we can observe, again, at pretty frequent timescales, that these communities look very similar in the run-up to the onset of irrigation. One of the other advantages to doing this kind of panel work is the fact that the repeated observations let us make comparisons almost, year by year in this case, but in many cases, again, over relatively small time frames. So this particular project, sorry if it's a little blurred out, I'll zoom in just a moment. This set of investments began in 1999. In many cases, it's still going on. The sample we use goes up until 2017, but in every year, there's a new set of polygons, perimeters, if you will, that are irrigated. You can see there's about 800 of them in our sample, and they're, again, relatively small along the rivers and tributaries, and they're varying. So in some places, the irrigation kicks on sooner, in some places later, but those places are actually relatively similar and nearby to one another. And that lets us draw comparison groups, again, on a year-by-year basis. And think back to if we didn't have Earth observation and we were forced to send survey teams into the field in these places, where we might have maybe two. If we were lucky and we can get a midline, right, we might have 3 observations, right? That lets us make essentially 2 comparisons at best, right? This lets us make comparisons, year by year for 20 years. Right? That gives us a much richer set of comparisons that we can make, gives us more confidence in the causal attribution, but it also, again, lets us think about the time path in a much more kind of concrete way. Promise you some actual imagery. Here's some actual imagery from partners at Planet over a roughly 4-year time window. This particular site gets irrigated circa 2016. And you can see a bunch of things. This is kind of time lapse. I'll freeze it for you in just a moment. But it is very, very clear, right, that with this resolution imagery, you can see major changes that are happening even on this one relatively small site. You can see the fields that are being irrigated move around a little bit, right? You can see that there are new plantings that happen in specific years. I think I've got months up there. These are largely, September, yeah. So we fixed that, but if you move around the months, obviously, you can see different seasonal patterns within the years. You can see different stuff happening in the river itself. We'll come back to that in a moment, but in the surrounding landscape as well. This particular case in Mali is also one where conflict is a major driver. It's a major driver of the actual productivity of agriculture. It's a major driver of people's ability to sell and access agricultural and other goods in this context. It's also a major driver of the ability to actually survey and visit, right, these locations. This is a bunch of ACLID data essentially on conflict events happening over a portion of our sample time frame, and those blue buffers, if you will, are the areas that are within 10 kilometers of those polygons where the irrigation kicks on. Lots of challenges here. Satellite imagery provides us, in this case, right, impacts on NDVI and other factors, even when in a certain year, no survey teams could visit it. I won't have time to show you, but there were demographic and health surveys being carried out in certain years alongside this. And in a key part of the time window, they could not visit northern Mali because of ongoing conflict that was happening. So we have years literally missing in the survey data because of conflict that we can fill in, if you will, with imagery in those cases. Obviously, very different constraints and ability to do things with that imagery, but it does give us some window into what's happening even when human conflict is preventing our ability to observe things directly. And it also, of course, data like this lets us also understand what are the effects on conflict, right? Can we reduce conflict by making investments in sustainable agriculture? Coming back to this idea that Earth observation can also broaden the scope of what we observe. This is higher resolution imagery that lets you see some of the environmental kind of knock-on effects of things like irrigating swatches along rivers. So on the left-hand side, you see a combination of growth along the riverbank and algal blooms in certain cases that are created by nutrients and water, right, leaching from that irrigated perimeter down to the riverbank. On the right-hand side, you see some gullies and erosion beginning to happen, again, as water runs off of the irrigated perimeters down toward the river, right? So this lets us get a handle to some degree on what other environmental effects are being created. That's not to say that, you know, these are kind of examples for you. We're actually able to tabulate and ask, okay, how often is this happening? And in this particular example of Mali, these didn't happen very often. We've kind of cherry-picked a few problematic cases to show you here, but the idea is that we can get a handle on the frequency of effects which no farmer reports were, you know, existing on. No farmer reports, I should say, partly because in some cases, no survey teams thought to ask about these questions as well, right? So this lets us ask a broader set of questions. These are kind of human observed, right? So to your point, David, about the power and limitations of AI, we can now use these to train an AI or an ML algorithm to look for similar patterns, right, in other areas. But we had to literally manually observe these first and ask, okay, what is changing about the environment? And importantly, we have to do that with teams that are not just, right, sitting in Virginia or in Rome for that matter, but also, you know, folks who are actually in the impacted arenas who can directly observe these and say, okay, this is what you should look for in addition to the things you might already know about. I want to highlight a maybe underappreciated point, which is, again, going back to this power of complementarity between survey and other ground-based data and Earth observation. And that is that maybe kind of, I would say, one of the dirty secrets of impact evaluation is that we don't often design the samples in impact evaluations to be large enough to do meaningful gender disaggregation. Survey costs are constrained. Like that was slide 2, right? I didn't even need to convince you of that. I was just throwing that up there for my own benefit. Costs are constrained. In some cases, to do meaningful gender disaggregation, they need to be increased by 50% or more. That means tough choices are made, and this doesn't often happen. And so being able to have large enough samples to ask, is what's happening to women and men similar? Is it different in harmful or helpful ways? We don't know the answer to that very often. So I want to kind of help you think about this idea. What if Earth observation could help us increase the samples in ways that could let us do better gender disaggregation? That's not exactly to say that we should use the satellites to compare exactly women farmed fields and men farmed fields and just put them in some kind of meaningless head-to-head race. Right? That is to be able to say, can we link survey data that does ask or kind of meaningfully interrogate the rights and ability to use different farm assets like land and other things to better inform the design of these projects? Right? Can we, again, leverage the time element and the spatial coverage that we have through Earth observation to do better gender disaggregation? That is a real challenge. So a lot of this is, the promise, if you will, of Earth observation. So again, I'm going to kind of echo a lot of what David was saying. I don't want to oversell this, right? It takes some really crucial aspects. I would say one of the most crucial aspects is really strong program data on the locations and timing of interventions. Almost always, the first conversation we have with partners as we're thinking about doing kind of geospatial impact evaluations with Earth observation, and everybody's rallied and excited, and the question is, okay, let's kick the tires on the program data. Let's interrogate whether it's strong enough and good enough to do this work. So, geographic features, how precisely are they mapped? And timing, how well do we know the timing of the interventions by site? So best case scenario, you have something that looks kind of like this. You have, whether it's points like latitude, longitude, or some polygons or lines, et cetera, again, and you have a timing measure for each one of those sites. And of course, in my dream world, you also have tens of thousands of these, and they're all spread out and beautiful. But those are some of the key elements to this. Where do these program data live? So some cases, they're already in the hands, right, of partners, because they're key things that were delivered operationally by the engineering teams. We have roads in impact evaluations where the road contractors who built the roads also, of course, mapped where they were so that they could prove that they had done the things, right? Same thing with the irrigation investments, right? They geotagged where they were being put in as a way to validate what was happening on the ground. Those are often some of the richest sets of data. In some cases, they're already sitting on servers at partner agencies like the World Bank or FAO and MCC. In some cases, they're still with the original contractors. We've had plenty of cases where what was actually delivered by the contractors to the partner organizations, again, the government agencies or whatever, are a bunch of PDF maps. We've done our fair share of, if you will, kind of going back and layering those maps over an actual GIS data, and in some cases having students manually trace lines. It's painful and not the most fun way to do it. But go back to this later on. An easy way to relax that is to much more systematically obtain, maintain that GIS data, even if you don't yet know what it will actually be used for in an impact evaluation setting. Just knowing the power of that data and the need to kind of acquire it, kick the tires on it, and understand it much earlier on. What I showed you earlier in Mali was largely drawn off of Earth imagery that focused especially on vegetative and water indices. That 2017 Burke and Lobel publication that I mentioned earlier about smallholder yields very much focused on the normalized difference vegetation index. This is kind of the most prolific, if you will, index that captures effectively the greenness of a plant at particular points in time. I'm sorry for the actual Earth observation specialists who I've just butchered that core idea of what that's really about. They'll kill me for it. Kunwar will kill me for it later. But we have to move beyond that if we want to tackle this in a much more systematic way. Again, to understand resiliency and much broader complex features. So can we use Earth observation to look not just at the plant growth, but also directly at how farmers are handling and managing their soil? So talk about some examples later on where we focus on the actual land preparation and soil management aspects. Irrigation, we've already talked a little bit about that, but much more broadly, water management. So installation of irrigation, but also the frequency of irrigation, the amount of water that's being used, the settings and timing of when it's being used, non-irrigation based water management. All of those are things that we could potentially directly observe, again, with Earth observation. That that Mali example also highlighted some issues with erosion that I showed you. Can we do that much more systematically, especially in settings like we'll talk about later on in Nepal, where entire hillsides are being eroded increasingly with climate-driven variability in weather, right? Can we directly observe that in order to understand also how interventions that are combating erosion are working? A lot of the vegetative indices work very much focus on key kind of cereal and staple crop production. But in many cases, farmers are trying to shift into higher value agriculture and horticultural production, right, as both a coping and a general development strategy. And many donors and funders are directly funding that kind of work, right, to try to shift farmers into kind of more diverse and higher value advances. Can we see tomato plants in the same way? Can we observe them with our observation in the same way that we see maize and cereals? It's a challenge still, right? Vegetative greenness works pretty well again for these cereals. Does it work as well for agroforestry? A lot of promise offered by that global forest cover data set, but that really, I think, captures much more the loss and growth of forests kind of writ large. It's not really at the scale where you could say, okay, a coffee farmer that chooses to, plant new trees, rejuvenate existing ones, right? Other types of tree-based forestry and farming. Can we directly observe the health, well-being, and productivity of that? And I mentioned at the very outset that we're not only interested in farmers, but also all the people around the world who draw their livelihoods from animal rearing, including people who are managing that livestock in one area and people who are managing those livestock as they migrate seasonally or move around much more systematically. A lot of promise to use Earth observation to observe those herds. At this point, probably still promise. So lots of opportunities and needs here. But to make these happen, we have to confront, I think, a few core challenges. Much of what I just described, things again like tomatoes, herds, land preparation, water management, all those things happen at smaller scales than large cereal plots or large maize plots. They're happening at smaller scales, and so we need to match higher resolution typically to that. And in some cases, again, more frequent observation to that. Can we catch these particular crops at the moment of flowering, when we can distinguish whether what's being grown is a squash or a maize plant, right? Can we get down to actual resolutions that let us distinguish, again, between these plants? Can we distinguish the height of the plants at sufficient resolutions, right? These are kind of core challenges to this. And then, seasonality, multi-cropping, intercropping, these are all part and parcel. A lot of that promise of being able to estimate yields is drawn from single crop, large stands, medium, I would say stands, let's call it, of single crops. Can we do this in situations, again, where maize and tomato are planted directly together with squash and other things? So that's the kind of breach into which this GeoField initiative attempts to step in. So this initiative is a partnership that intentionally spans organizational types. So AidData, our research lab that's based at William & Mary, we're a research university based a couple hours south of Washington, D.C., partnering with Dev Global. I mentioned partners here yesterday, but this is a team that helps us think about both the Earth observation side and the community building side. Partners at Mercy Corps, who both think and do impact evaluation work, but also have strong ties to actual implementation of projects on the ground. And then our partners at the Gates Foundation, who help both amplify this and support a lot of this work and help us think through some of these challenges and how we solve them. And so this is the intersection, if you will, of the impact evaluation space, the agricultural development space, and the Earth observation space. Okay. Many of you represent at least one, in many cases, at least two of these spaces, and have feet in multiple worlds. I'm going to challenge you here to see if you can make some new partnerships so you can span all of these worlds in one and think about how this works. So what is GeoField intended to do? One of the first things we're doing is creating a showcase set of studies to kind of show what the art of the possible is, if you will, to lay a few kind of foundational stones to say, okay, you can do this. We started with what we're calling rapid impact use cases. Largely, these were existing impact evaluation or interventions that had impact studies associated with them, that we tried to say, can we integrate Earth observation onto these existing impact evaluations or designs? Not start from scratch in the ideal world where we do all of these things simultaneously, but just say stuff that's already shown a lot of promise and has at least some reasonable ground and survey data associated with it, what can we add to it? So in the next session, my colleagues Kunwar and Carly are going to walk you through a set of these, and later on, my colleague Anna Paula is in the FAO session that's going to happen later this afternoon. We'll talk about the last case in Nigeria. You can see that they are regionally diverse as best we could, and they try to capture these kind of beyond vegetative indices outcomes that we're thinking about. We thought these would be some of the easiest to start with. Not easy still, right? We have a lot of really promising results already. So again, Kunwar and Carly are going to show you some really promising stuff, but they are not easy still, and there are plenty of complaints we'll tell you about, like over coffee or drinks. That's largely stuff we're doing this year and into early 2024. This project is going to last another 3 years, and in that time window, we hope to tackle a longer set of impact studies. And this is a case where we're very much open for ideas. We have already kind of a long laundry list of potential cases, but we're very open to new collaborations along this front. In particular, some of the initial ideas are ways to think about soil health, maybe by doing things like fusing synthetic aperture radar data, which helpfully penetrates cloud cover, one of the biggest challenges, of course, to Earth observation, fusing that together with multispectral imagery to try to do a bunch of stuff to see if we can tell how healthy particular soil sets are. Thinking about, again, this adoption of crops that are not necessarily staples or cereals, especially things like sweet potato and orange flush sweet potato, which have different nutrient bases to deliver for food security. Again, hopefully maybe based on crop phenology, so the kind of seasonality, if you will, of specific aspects of plant growth that we can maybe detect from imagery with some good preliminary work on that as well. Thinking maybe about the adoption of abiotic stress-tolerant rice varieties, so varieties of rice that can withstand flooding and drought, and whether we can detect those more robustly from Earth observation, and again, agroforestry conditions like coffee tree and other tree health. Those are kind of some of the initial ideas and things pitched. If you have other ideas and we've yet to chat, please find a member of the GeoField team and pitch us your ideas, if you will. We're kind of continually thinking about this stuff and hope to make some decisions about our longer term impact investments later this fall. We'll put out a kind of formal call for this as well, so don't worry, you won't miss your chance if you don't grab us now, but this is something to very much keep in mind. I should say our model for engagement in most of these cases is that a partner or a researcher has, again, some of that first data on the program interventions, where they took place, and maybe in some cases some existing impact analysis that you've already done or have designed. And our team, supported by the Gates Foundation, helps to bring along the Earth observation elements to that partnership. We're not just going to do a bunch of studies, don't worry. We're also doing things like bringing people together for useful collaborations like this convening. We're going to have a set of virtual convenings and a repeat of this in future years. The team that put this one together is like begging for some time off after this, so I won't promise you exactly when that's going to happen or where, but we'll come back to you on that. We're going to have a bunch of digital channels for communication and sharing knowledge that we're going to release soon as well. And then all of the data and code for the impact cases that I just mentioned are going to be public use and released very shortly after we actually get those results done. So very much a hope that we are sharing not just the results, of course, but actually the underlying kind of data and code and designs powering these. And then I just want to announce a couple of really exciting things that we've got coming out. So not just one, two special issues in a couple of really terrific journals. So the first one is the Journal of Development Economics. Really grateful for Andrew Foster's support as editor of that journal. A special issue focused on exactly this, integrating Earth observation into impact studies in agriculture and climate change. That call is imminent. It's just literally been, I think, technically opened, and we'll send you all of the details for that very, very shortly. A really great team, in addition to Kunwar and myself. Mangelo's here as well. Feel free to chat with him right there. And Karen McClure. So our hope with both special issues is that the editorial teams reflect the multidisciplinarity of this. This special issue in development economics has a more causal aspect, if you will, to it, but very much integrating Earth observation questions into it, and that editorial team reflects that. Also a special issue in the Journal of Applied Earth Observation and Geoinformation. Slightly different title, if you will, very similar idea, but this one, again, much more focused on the Earth observational details of this to get those details right. Again, a very multidisciplinary team, including some really great Earth observation folks, including Foster Mensah, who's here as well. So feel free to chat with Foster as well, but also Gang Chen, Amy Fraser, Catherine Nakalembe, who many of you know from NASA Harvest, and Jen Alex Garcia. So different mix of economists and Earth observation folks in the two journals. And again, a hope that the multidisciplinarity kind of sparks payoffs and circulation among these two disparate communities and starts to bring them together much more so. So a way to share the knowledge, if you will. Again, we'll share the details of these special issues. Both of them will give you roughly till next summer, if you will, to submit to them. And the hope is very much that this kind of sparks new collaborations that maybe begin here, but that also are good ways to learn about what else is new. Okay. I've rambled on quite a bit here, but this is kind of the core aspects of the GeoField idea. My other hope is that over the next 2 days, you really do take the time to introduce yourself to somebody who's maybe very different from you and start to think about how you might work together with somebody who's in a different discipline. Maybe you already do this, and many of you span multiple kind of disciplines and have feet in more than one world already. And in that case, I challenge you to reach out to a third space or discipline and see what you can pull together. Yeah. So thank you. Thanks for being here. We do have time for a few questions before we take a break, a well-earned break. Any? Yeah.
So I think you addressed this a little bit, but I mean, I think the key thing from my perspective about this whole literature is the NDVI drives us toward a yield focus, not a profitability focus. And you're niddling at the edges, but the big one is labor costs, right? And trying to interpret your Molly stuff without labor costs, yes, it seems like they still like it, so there must be some positive profitability. But like, how do we think about that problem, or how are you thinking about that problem?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's another reason why I think trying to do this in spaces where you have access to both survey data and Earth observation as a starting point is super important. Exactly to this question of, we understand the biophysical changes that are happening and we kind of implied sustainability from that, but we don't necessarily understand how those human communities are responding and how those costs are being reapportioned necessarily within the household, right? So maybe the advent in this particular case of diesel-powered irrigation shifts men or women in or out of that particular set of irrigation and what's happening. I didn't really have time to show it, but where we do have the demographic and health surveys, we can see changes happening in child nutrition and other aspects that are specific to kind of women. So we're not necessarily getting at, in the DHS, how people are spending their time, but those are opportunities where we do have things like the LSMS or other survey data to try to reconcile, as you're saying, some of the changes in how people are spending their time and what their kind of underlying profitability is. We're often, in many of these cases, missing things like how much fertilizer is being applied, whether new or improved hybrid seeds were also provided as part of the interventions. We could start to get at some of that with Earth observation data, and we can detect some differences in inputs, especially if things like water. So we can see obviously how much water costs are going up with irrigation, but we definitely can't get all the aspects of farming that are changing alongside it, and they are critical. And that is kind of going back to this point about the program data. I really emphasize the kind of spatial and timing features, but it remains obvious that we need to understand exactly what was provided and how long it was provided directly to those farmers to be able to understand the real cost effectiveness of those interventions, right? Because maybe what was really well kind of delineated and marked was the kind of harder stuff like the pumps or the roads or the other infrastructure, but the agricultural advice that was provided, maybe some of the inputs, those aren't geotagged necessarily in the same frequency and precision. And so getting that out of survey data or direct reports is really critical. There's some really cool work using mobile phone-based data collection, which Tomoko's back there. You can definitely talk to her about the challenges and opportunities that offers, but as a way to get lower cost, time use, and input kind of data to complement their Earth observation. But completely agree, it's a critical feature. Yeah, sorry.
Well, thank you very much for very useful insights. And you rightly said that impact evaluations are costly, and specifically small organizations, they are kind of avoiding to do rigorous impact assessments and impact evaluations. And mostly projects are going for program evaluations. So I was also thinking that while listening to you that this tool is not only for impact evaluations, but it can also be very useful for the program evaluations, as most of the organizations are going in that way. What would be your thought? Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree that in many cases, whether you use the imagery to design a rigorous comparison group, if you will, or if you're maybe just much more directly observing what's actually happening, especially on the environmental condition outcomes and to some degree on the farming plots themselves, as a complement to any other key informant interviews, focus group discussions, or just single survey rounds in treated populations. This is a really useful complement to that. I would say we've actually had a few cases where this has nudged teams that might ordinarily just think about program evaluation into saying, oh wait, look, I got data on a bunch of comparison sites here as well that I didn't have to send survey teams to go into, because I didn't think about that originally. And so it kind of automatically creates a comparison group of opportunity, if you will, and so helps nudge this growth in the coverage of impact evaluation, which is, again, part of that kind of original motivation. But completely agree, it's super useful for all sorts of things beyond just impact evaluation. Yeah, Julius.
Hi, hi, Ariel. Thanks a lot for the very insightful representation of the scope of GeoField. I feel like a core value proposition of what GeoField is trying to advance is a collaboration that transcends disciplinary and programmatic boundaries. And I also recognize that lots of the systems in which we operate, you have multiple problems, going at the same time. So a lot of times you have lots of programs, programs focused on education, or maybe programs that are focused on improving literacy, or really programs focused on agronomic production. The challenge, though, for impact evaluation is that you're not often able to link, or attribute changes to specific intervention for, lots of reasons. The question to you is, how does GeoField intend to approach the delineation of the impact, sort of attribution of changes to specific programs at a specific time within specific geography? There's another question that goes along that line. I'd like to discuss that with you personally. But again, how do you attribute those changes and at the same time foster the collaboration, between partners to make sure that we're truly working in a progressive manner? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mentioned before that example in Mali. It was a group of donors and the government itself that was making that series of investments. And we certainly had lots of kind of interest in disaggregating, whether it was this part of the investment being made by one, let's say, European government that could be, attributed to versus that aspect. And, in the end, we kind of waved our hands at that. But often these programs are a combination, and they're a combination spatially. Different parts are being covered by different donors. As you say, they're kind of complementary kind of stacks of interventions being provided. Honestly, it's a challenge still. It's a challenge for many of the reasons that I talked about before. You have to have relatively precise spatial and timing data from all these disparate sources. In some cases, that's maintained by the recipient government. In some cases, that's not. And where it's not, it is a major challenge to be able to really understand. And it does continue to limit us. And so maybe I'll turn that question back on all of you guys as a challenge to think about, can we do this in a setting where there's not just one partner, but multiple partners? Again, kind of a showcase. I think we have time for, maybe one more comment. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks, Ariel. As we were developing this initiative, my thinking was, yes, let's tack this on to sort of traditional impact evaluations. We do a lot of them, and we think there's value added to this. But I'm thinking more and more as well in terms of future use cases. It would be advantageous to look at impact from a policy perspective, and to say, like, if this policy was enacted, what was the impact, right, or the change? And I think we've talked maybe a little bit about some of the policies in India that have banned burning of residue, right, which is something that seems like it would be pretty straightforward. Wouldn't necessarily have to have an on-the-ground impact assessment. It could, obviously, but it seems like it would be pretty powerful to show this as an example where you could really make a rather real-time assessment about the effects of a policy. So that might be something we want to think about in terms of future use cases. The other thing that comes to mind is, and this comes up with almost every investment that I've made, is that how do we best communicate this in a way that generates interest and change, right? So publishing in journals is definitely one way we do that. I think another way we do that, maybe through this policy angle, where because that's what would maybe get the attention of governments, and I think it'd be really good. We touched on it a little bit yesterday. What's the interest of governments themselves in this type of approach? So if we could think about the different types of communication strategies that would enhance the uptake of this type of technology sooner rather than later, I think that'd be great. So.
I figured when I called on Richard, it would mean more work and more ideas. It's a good thing. Okay, well, thank you all so much. We're going to take a break, and then the next session, we'll show you a bunch of these rapid impact use cases and another one from Ukraine, from Klaus, and then in the afternoon, we'll do our breakout groups. But thanks again, everybody.